Family head Chu Chai-ming chased his grandson out of the family palace and slammed the door behind him. The young man dropped to his haunches, looking around. He couldn't believe it. Was this really his fate? Memories flashed through his mind. Just 2 days ago, he was helping people succeed, but 2 days ago, he was reborn as the 13th young member of the Chu family, one of the great Qin families. He was indignant. He had been kicked out of his house for sneezing at a banquet and was now exiled to an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The young man was squatting in a corner in the dim moonlight from under the bars. He begged for help, crying. The heavy wooden door creaked. The boy started up and asked timidly who was there. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. A gray-robed stranger was standing in front of him, a white handkerchief covering his face. The young man thought apprehensively, is this really God? The stranger rocked back and forth, shaking the trunk in his hand. He asked for help to remove the blanket from his head. It was Uncle Butler. The table was set lavishly. The butler kindly mentioned that the furniture would be delivered soon and asked me to help myself. The young man was glad that his old acquaintance had not left him in the lurch. The old man only looked down sadly in response, wishing that he had warned the boy earlier, because the master had long disliked him. He added sadly that the young man had better come up with a plan to apologize to his grandfather and gain his trust. The young man chewed and asked resentfully, "Why is he so hated?" The butler spoke softly about his father. His father was going to be the next head of the family. But he fell in love, and it broke all the plans. He married a girl from a lowly family, and soon after Chu was born, the unwanted couple left the ancestral home and have not heard from them since. The young man listened intently as he chewed on the meat. The butler packed up as the other servants arrived. As the old man looked back at Chu Luo with a sad expression, he wondered when the young man would grow up. Servants wielded brooms and rags around Chu's dungeon. After putting down the last of the furniture, a young servant cheerfully dusted off his hands and said that everything was ready. The young man looked around contentedly. A voice came from behind and mentioned that Chu Luo had already been home for 1 day. System reward, Invincible martial arts power. Chu looked around warily at the voice, not sure where it was coming from. The young man was upset. Why is the system following him again? But her cold voice continued. Points will be awarded during your stay in the house, but if you leave, the points will be cancelled. The young man was indignant. Where are the daily tasks, quests, and control panel that were last time? The system continued. The points for today were already awarded, and to get more, you need to stay at home. The young man just snorted in response. He woke up sweating. As soon as he opened his eyes, he felt hot and discontented from the nightmare. He woke up on the couch and noticed the book. He threw it away in fright and asked who could have left it with him. A moment later, he was frantically reading the book, realizing with annoyance that everything he had seen earlier was not a dream. The book stated, Invincible martial art is the ultimate defense technique of the mortal realm. The third realm is the basic level of cultivation, consisting of 3 stages, refining the body, opening channels, and gathering Kai. He continued to read. If you reach the top, you can overcome Xuanguan, otherwise you will have to remain mortal. He was sadly aware that the Xuan realm was above the mortal realm, along with the spirit realm, void realm, and harmony realm. He must have been a rather weak student, as the young man noted with annoyance, so the system gave him a reason to develop. Putting down the book, the young man decided to become a cultivator. The energy of the book enveloped his hands, and then his entire body. Chu Luo heaved a sigh of relief as he recalled his knowledge of meridians from cultivators, otherwise he wouldn't have understood anything. He'd held the new energy in his palms. Cultivation helped him strengthen his body. After twirling the shiny ball in his hand, the young man decided to rest and think about the bonuses. As he chewed on the fruit, he thought, if you practice the body first, then the spirit and Kai, then what's next? The system's voice loudly marked the 3rd day of stay and the reward for it. A ghost dagger. He turned it over in his hands. The blade was too blunt to even cut an apple. It was the 4th day Chu had been home. System rewards. Crouching dragon, hidden snake. The young man enthusiastically practiced new blows in the yard. A jerk, and a light blow from the snake, Another jerk, and he delivers a powerful blow from the dragon. He had a premonition of his own invincibility. Rubbing his chin thoughtfully, he looked down at the book and promised himself not to make mistakes or sneeze again. Stretching his legs out on the couch, he continued to read the book. The previous dynasty was overthrown by 4 families: Qin, Chu, He, and Zhao. The Qin family became the ruling family, and the rest were its assistants. He was hailed as the 13th brother. The young man, frowning from under the book, recognized the voice of his sister Chu Yun. A young girl in a summer green dress asked smilingly how he was doing. He asked mischievously why she hadn't sent servants this time. Had she decided to treat him to pretty eyes? As she set the table, the girl replied sheepishly that she had been meaning to come for a long time, but there was a lot of work to do after his banishment. The young man responded sarcastically that a nice company demands a nice chair. The girl consoled that she would talk to the angry grandfather at the first opportunity. The guy with his mouth full noted that he was having fun here, especially since the food in the company of a pretty little sister is even tastier. The nurse looked at him sharply, noting his friendliness. As they parted from the other side of the door, she reminded him of her promise to talk to his grandfather. The guy waved back sweetly, then sneered at the girl's naivete. The system chimed to celebrate the end of another day. Cultivation level increased. Chu Lu felt a new power seep into him. Dishes and books flew around. Chu was practicing a new skill, and now he was maneuvering in the middle of the room in the lotus position. Overcoming the realm was difficult, and for the 4th time, the young man had already failed, baring his teeth. But even so, he could feel himself gradually approaching the closed door. Exhaling wearily, he consoled himself with the thought that he had only been here a few days. The system chimed. Ding. And here he is for the 5th day at home, a new reward, the secret book of the mind. The book immediately flew into his hand. The young man read. A new technique for a higher level of development. He snorted at the system, as he didn't even have a clue how to develop this technique. He slammed the book shut in annoyance, preferring to rely on his already acquired skills. As he looked around, he thought about how to train his mind control and find the aura. With this technique, he needed to sense new creatures nearby. He could feel flowers, birds, fish, and insects, and even birds in the sky and monkeys in the bushes. He threw up. He decided to leave it at that. He had gone too far for his skills. He was called to lunch. As he gathered up his hair and didn't turn around, he could only sense the aura of one guest, even though the servants usually came in 2s. The little man held out a basket of treats with a malicious smile. The young man was about to thank him when he suddenly felt the negative aura of the rice in the basket. There was a parasite egg. Chu Lu flared up and lashed out at the ill-wisher. Chu Lu angrily asked the stranger, pointing with his finger, who sent him. The peasant, trembling, insisted that only the butler always sent food. Chu irritably reproached him for asking for it and using the last technique to penetrate the opponent's mind. The little man felt a wild pain and made a face. The mind hand was trying to fish out the stranger's thoughts. The young man repeated his question. The man, as if under hypnosis, slowly identified himself as a messenger of darkness and admitted that he wanted to possess the young man, and then his entire family. The young man was taken aback. The cultist and henchman of the evil palace was standing in front of him. In his world, there was an area where such minions gathered, and there were always fights and wars on their lands. There weren't many people living there, but they were all powerful. Outside of their palace, the evil kings were scattered all over southern China and were difficult to distinguish among humans, so it was also not easy to kill them. This scoundrel in front of Chu was only one, but he was still a great threat to him and the entire family. The young man continued to ask, getting into the mind of the enemy, did he come alone? The man replied that he did, and admitted that if he controlled Chu, he could control the whole family. The young man grinned and knew that he should definitely warn his grandfather, even though he didn't want to see him. The peasant's face was drawn, and he snarled menacingly. Chu was taken aback. He hadn't counted on resistance. The enemy extended its claws from under the finger and swung. Chu dodged, cursing. He thought frantically, if he has the aura of a dragon, can they harm him with their claws? As he backed away, He debated how to tell his family that the stranger in front of him was a cultist. The minion continued to wave its claws wildly. The youth clenched his fists, preparing for the snake's strike. He anticipated how, after his victory, many would admire him and finally believe in him and call him back. The other man leaned forward, snarling. Chu gathered his thoughts and formed a golden bell-shaped aura around him. He wondered why even exiles couldn't be left alone. The servants called out to him, reminding him of lunch. The young man sighed with relief and noted that they were just in time. The servants froze. When they came to their senses, they rushed to the master's aid. The young man was glad that the servants had noticed him, which meant that they would soon report his false cowardice to his grandfather and the entire Chu family. This image was only to his advantage, so that others would not recognize his techniques and achievements. The opponent delivered a sharp blow, hysterically threatening the evil king's enemies with death. The young man was trotting away from the maddened cultist. The servants grumbled at their master's cowardice. They jumped back from the flying pair. The young man waved his arms in panic, and the enemy continued to press on and threaten death. Servants forcibly detained the pursuer. The young man, meanwhile, had run behind the wall and was breathing heavily, turning pale. The servants looked at him with annoyance, reproaching him for his incompetent fight. Dragging the enemy behind them, they decided to go to the master and call a doctor. But Chu wasn't napping. Glancing sideways at the men as they left, he noticed that he was now going to get a bad name. He adjusted the power of consciousness and reached out to the cultist's thoughts, killing him to keep his secret. The 6th day passed. Ding Yi new system reward, the Great Xuan Dan box. In front of Chu was a large green chest. The young man noticed that he had obtained an elixir that would finally help him break through the Xuan realm. Meanwhile, the head of the family, Chu Chiaming, was indignant. His son, Chu Luo, had always been so strong, and now he suddenly found out that he had turned into a spineless slug. Master Chu Qing calmly remarked that their family was full of talent. Sister Yun cheerfully greeted her 13th brother again. They were sitting at a set table. Chu devoured the food greedily, and his sister insinuated that his brother should be more careful and not forget to take care of himself. Chu snorted, justifying himself by saying that the guy from yesterday was just a small-time brawler. Yun excitedly noticed that he had already hit the wall in his fright. Chu choked. His sister quickly tapped him on the back. After calming down, she started talking about her grandfather's tournament. Everyone from family members to servants and artisans could participate. Chu frowned, sensing a trick. Then he called for her to follow him. The nurse looked at her brother incredulously. When he came to his room, he showed her the large dark green chests and proudly noted that these supplies of elixirs were inherited from his father. Then he handed her one of the boxes. Turning it over in her hands, she noted the value of the inheritance. The girl thanked her brother for the gift and promised to use the potion wisely. Chu thought with a grin that this tournament was probably designed to expose cultists, and most likely a cockroach was found in the house. The Ding system announced a new reward, a box of elixirs. Chu looked at the newly opened chest and was relieved that he didn't have to worry about cultists of this level. Meanwhile, Yun practiced her punches flawlessly in the tournament. She was declared the winner of the 13th battle. Grandpa congratulated her and noted her good training because the Chu family has many talents. Yun bowed respectfully. The 14th battle was announced. The participants were ordered to stand on the battlefield. The gardener, Ding Qiuqin, a heavy man with a scar on half his face, must fight against young Master Chu Qin, the older brother of the Chu family. A young fighter with a long tail on the back of his head stood opposite, his hands crossed behind his back and his face bowed respectfully. The gardener chose 2 large knives. The judges were perplexed and asked the young man to choose a weapon, to which Chu Qin calmly replied that he could handle it with his bare hands. The opponent bared his teeth. He wanted to kill the talented older brother of the Chu family in order to control his family. A fight was announced. With a roar, the gardener attacked the young man, brandishing knives. Grandpa was worried about Junior Qin. A swing of the knife and the blade is stopped by Chu Qin's 2 fingers. The young man swung his weapon around and frowned as he asked Ding, "Who taught him this skill?" Then he added sarcastically that with such a school, it was not necessary to go to gardeners. The governor recoiled, surprised at the strength of the young man. The servants ran over to grab the cultist and protect their master. Qin stopped them. He spitefully clarified that the tournament wasn't over yet and no one was allowed on the battlefield. Then, with a sharp jerk, he knocked the knife out of Ding's hand and then pushed him back behind the field with the back of his hand. The cultist hit the stone floor, screaming in pain. The servants covered him with their swords and told him not to move. The winner is Chu Qin. The nurse ran up to her brother and anxiously asked if he was all right. She hadn't expected to see a cultist in the family. Her brother reassured her and pointed out that 13th brother Chu was weak during the attack last time, and if it wasn't for him, the family would never have known about the evil in the courtyard. They decided to visit him after the tournament. Meanwhile, Chu Lu's 13th brother bared his teeth as he pored over the new technique. He couldn't break through to consciousness. Ding, a new reward is ready, a copy of the book The Art of Dust. The young man noted that it was very timely and fun after a grueling workout. He read the scriptures avidly. With the new technique, he could hide his breath and blend in with the world around him. At the same time, it seemed useless to him. Why hide when he was alone in the house? He consoled himself with the thought that it would be a long time before he entered the new kingdom, and the teaching would not be superfluous. Sister Yun came early in the morning and knocked on her brother's door. The young man, barely opening his eyes, dragged himself to the door. Rubbing his eyes, he sleepily asked her what she wanted. His sister was going to say goodbye to him. Chu was taken aback. They were already sitting at a table in the courtyard, drinking tea. The brother cheerfully asked if Yun had really broken through to the Chuan realm and could now go down to the mountains to train. The girl thanked him for the elixirs and added that big brother Qin would come to see him. Under the bright light of the sun, she waved at him on the horizon. My brother smiled back indulgently. Sighing, he looked down at the table and thought that now he didn't have anyone to be with, and he didn't even have a TV. Looking at the mountain expanses, he sadly noted that his mood was spoiled because of the farewell. Late in the evening, the system chimed in honor of a new reward, a thunderfinger that can change the energy of the air by creating lightning at the fingertips. The young man was sitting in his bedroom reading. He can become stronger depending on the realm he is in. He couldn't sleep because of the breakup with Yun, so he decided to practice so that he could channel the energy into his finger. Meanwhile, there was a rustle behind the house. Two dark-robed strangers remarked that they had found Chu's ancestral lands. The intruders stared slyly at the dim light in the window. They knew that Chu Lu's son lived in this house. Finally, they charged down the slope, leaping. Chu, meanwhile, was sitting in the lotus position and practicing breaking through again. Misty energy formed around him, and he thought that he shouldn't have started this technique after the thunder finger, and it was already dangerous to interrupt. The young man sensed that someone was in the courtyard. Could it really be Sister Yun? No, it's a little late, and for the servants too. He tried to focus again. One of the guys outside the window with short red hair asked the other one to set up a spiritual net. The blue-haired guy nodded. They crept closer to the house. The red-haired man felt a strong breath and assumed that he was preparing to make a breakthrough. He wondered, isn't Chu Lu's son a loser? He didn't understand how he was capable of such a technique. The other called out to him like a brother and said that everything was ready. The guy cautiously told him about his premonition. Chu breaks the barrier to a new realm. My brother didn't believe me and asked again. Then he sneeringly pulled out a black poison shuriken, preparing to throw it at Chu. The other stopped him, explaining that he might go mad or die if interrupted during the breakthrough. They couldn't kill him as the main hostage. Something suddenly stirred in the air. The boys looked around in surprise. They cautiously thought that he had made a breakthrough. The red-haired man noticed that he could no longer feel his breathing or his movements, as if no one else was there. The brother in the blue scarf viciously demanded to stop pretending and stormed into the house. The second one chased after him to stop him, calling out to Li Fan. He was already in the house, shouting at Chu to come out. An unknown force swept over him. Li Fan fell unconscious. His brother rushed to save him. A voice from the darkness rebuked the intruders for making so much noise. The guy in the bandana yelled in fright for him to come out immediately to fight. The voice called the enemy a creature and called itself the owner of the house. A blue kimono appeared out of the darkness and then Chu Luo's face. The red-haired man, holding his brother in his arms, asked dumbfounded if he was a ghost or a human and why he couldn't feel his breath. Chu viciously demanded an explanation for the invasion of his home in the middle of the night. Chu put his hands behind his back and confidently stated that he would still kill strangers, but first he wanted to chat like a typical villain. Then he said that all that was happening now was the dust technique. The stranger looked at him quizzically. Chu continued that with this technique, he wouldn't be able to sense either his breath or his aura. Then he closed his eyes, adjusted the energy around him, and looked at the enemy from under his brows. He threatened that his house would become their grave, especially since no one would see him outside without his aura, which means no one would interfere. With that, he sprayed a sharp stream of energy around him and directed it at the enemies. The guy in the bandana was horrified. All his fears were confirmed, and Chu Luo really passed into the Chuan realm. A fist, and the snakebite bit into the enemy. The guy flew backwards. Clouds of dust rose. Chu bit his lip, realizing that he'd gone too far. There was blood and guts all over the yard now. The thought of having to clean it all up by himself until morning terrified him. The Ding system has announced a new gift for defeating villains, a living flower. Chu wondered if this was the devouring flower. The stone floor crackled as a sprout with a purple bud appeared, which quickly grew and expanded in size. The huge bud bared its fangs. Then a few more wildflowers appeared. They devoured the corpses and what was left of them. Chu watched in shock. Blood oozed from under the buds' mouths. The young man remembered that the flower is able to save the dead man's memories for a while, which means that he can read them right now. He walked slowly to the flower, stroked it, and closed his eyes. He had a vision of two brothers discussing how a member of their family went to prison, and now thousands of such stacks are rotting in captivity. The guy in the blue scarf picked up the poisonous smoke to use it to attack. The second brother was pointing at the map of the Chu house. They were going to sneak in there, since there were almost no guards in this house. The next vision. And now two villains are already hiding outside the house. Chu was horrified to realize that he was lucky that they didn't have time to use the poison smoke, otherwise this place wouldn't have recovered from the damage for another 100 years. Moreover, the smoke would spread further and the Chu family would not be able to cultivate. Then he gave the flower some magic apples to feed on and went to his bedroom. As he left, he worried about how fruitful the tournament had been. A dozen cultists had been exposed, and now he was only alive because of luck. He finally broke through the barrier, feeling the danger. It had been more than a month since Chu Luo had lived in a house on the outskirts. During this time, the system rewarded him with a bunch of elixirs, weapons, and magic pills. But all of this was not so important compared to the fact that he was finally able to open the inner vision. Chu recalled the sensations. First it was darkness, then a glimmer that grew brighter and brighter, and then the light filled the entire space. Something began to manifest in him. It was a muddy blur. It was getting closer and simultaneously turning into a scribble. Yesterday's award was the book The Art of Kizun, which is a technique for external protection and internal spiritual training. Chu was content with the fact that the system seemed to tailor the techniques to suit his skills. His techniques worked at all levels of cultivation, and with their help, he could defend against the cursed cultists. There was a quick knock on the Chu family's grandfather's door. The servants were shouting that a message had arrived from the mountain. Chu Tianming opened the envelope and was horrified to read that the butler was in league with them. He asked to reward those who found out this important information. The servant added that about a dozen Chu families were already injured, although the lists were still being checked. The old man pounded his fists on the table, cursing the cultists. He knew that it was necessary for the three families to unite against the scourge. Yun cheerfully greeted her 13th brother. As she poured the tea, she noted that she had brought grass from the mountains. My brother refused and preferred to listen to what my sister saw on the way to the mountains. The girl screamed that the cold tea would already be tasteless and threatened to sprinkle it with boiling water. She wasn't joking, and she was already pouring tea on him. The young man screamed and finally fell out of bed in a sweat. It was just a nightmare. He tried to remember when he fell asleep after training. Running a hand over his cheek, he found that his face was really wet. The liquid smelled bad. A white, mewing face appeared in front of his face. Shu jumped back, cursing at the cat. The ding system found that the master was depressed and needed to relax. The animal was probably just another reward. The young man grumbled that he didn't like pets, and this muzzle also peed on him on the first day. The kitten meowed innocently in response. After a few days of training in Chu Luo's unconscious vision, a grain of sand had already grown into a piece of land, or even into fertile soil altogether. But this land was still empty and wandering in endless space. Chu's thoughts were interrupted by the cat's paw on his master's face. The guy took the cat by the scruff of the neck and pompously asked him not to interfere with him during training, even though he was so cute. The kitten just meowed threateningly, looking around at the empty bowl. Chu hastily blushed and apologized, saying that no one was perfect. The kitten scratched back viciously. The bowl was finally filled and the cat immediately began to eat. Chu grumbled that his pet didn't even say a meow. There was a knock on the door. He wondered who it was. The servants were leaving food at the entrance. His sister hadn't returned yet, and the cultists weren't so polite. He exhaled, thinking that if there was a knock, it wouldn't be so bad, and went to open the latch. Chu Qin's older brother was standing in the doorway. He tensely asked how 13th brother was doing after all the events. Chu Luo didn't move. They sat down to tea. Chu Luo noted with embarrassment that he hadn't expected to see his older brother so quickly, even though his sister had mentioned him. Qin pointed out that he had to do this despite having so many things to do. He looked at him intently and said that if it wasn't for Chu, all 300 people in the family wouldn't know that there were rats among us. Chu hesitated, scratching his head and grinning. Qin firmly stated that his brother should go down the mountain with him. Chu was startled. My brother smiled back and explained that families should unite in the fight against evil. He believed that everything was going well. The 13th brother would gain experience, and together they would overthrow evil. If Chu Luo helped them, then Grandpa would forgive him and bring him back to the family. The young man said regretfully that he couldn't go down yet. My brother enlisted to talk to my grandfather, thinking that he was afraid to run away without permission. Chu frowned and said that he didn't like it, despite his good intentions. He was ashamed that he was a disgrace to the family and didn't deserve to be forgiven yet. Qin looked at him with a puzzled expression. Then he grinned, admitting that he had underestimated him. Turning around in the doorway, Qin said goodbye, that it might be months before they would meet again. His younger brother asked him to take care of himself. In response, he added with a smile that his grandfather did not dislike him, despite his actions, and asked not to be offended by him. The gate slammed shut. Chu threw his head back, exhaling from the grueling conversation. He had been nervous all this time, but now he was proud of the steadfastness of his spirit. Chu Qin was being watched from behind the trees. The voice of an ill-wisher threatened to kill him after meeting Chu. A stranger in a lilac gray kimono jumped out from under the ambush. It was the deputy leader of the local cult, Lu Quan. He thought longingly of the upcoming revenge against the Chu family. In his opinion, the son was a failure, but he was still valuable because he was still the son of that Chu Qiluo. Holding the black bowl in his hand, he watched as he dealt with it and then controlled their entire family. They were supposed to go back to the house with the toxic smoke, and Lu already had a plan. He lunged forward. Running into the yard, he peeked around the corner at the house. Lu Quan continued to think complacently about how quickly he would deal with the kid. He scurried along the gate. The kitten looked at the intruder with a puzzled expression. Lu Quan was already at the entrance gate. He snorted that this house didn't even have security and laughed at the fact that he was hiding. With his fingers outstretched like a cat, he adjusted the great breath and key rope techniques. Energy seeped through the gate. Like a rope, she grabbed Chu Luo, tied him up, and dragged him to his master. The young man tried to get out, but in vain. The rope bit into his body. His pale face glared at Lu, who only sneered at him and told him not to even try to leave. Suddenly, he noticed that the prisoner was getting smaller. A few jerks and the rope was empty. Lu was furious. He didn't believe that this brat in front of him possessed such a technique. A tug behind him and he gets hit in the face. The man recoiled and fell to the ground. The kitten licked its paw contentedly and walked along its body. Chu praised the beast for such a fatal blow. Then the young man leaned toward the stranger. He recognized him as the deputy of one of the cult's divisions and judged that he should not let him go. Chu thought of the flower. Behind them, the ground crackled as a huge devouring flower appeared. Its bud opened and 4 tongues and fangs poked out. The flower quickly grabbed the enemy's body and hid it in its blade. Chu walked over to the flower to look at the enemy's thoughts. He had a vision. A short man who had previously brought rice with a parasite reported to the deputy that for 3 months the Chu family did not recognize him as a cultist. He appreciated his work and demanded to continue working in the same spirit. He held a black ball on a cloth in his hand, a substance with poisonous smoke that they were going to use against the enemy. He handed it to the cultist. Next vision. The deputy is angry that there is no news from the Chu family for a long time. Chu Luo told himself in annoyance that it was the same group as last time. He noted indifferently that they had no imagination and asked himself, why use this smoke twice? The ding system rewarded Chu for killing a cultist. In Chu Luo's mind, the fertile land grew in the flickering light, but it was still empty. He wondered if there would be anything else here after its development. The young man continued to meditate and felt a new influx of strength coming to him. But at the same time, 2 techniques couldn't be mastered: the soul seal and the sword technique. The sword technique, as it was written in the book, is an imperial scripture technique. It was necessary to master it sooner in order to deal with the onslaught of sectarians faster. Behind the rock in the cave, Lu Quan's go-betweens were whispering to each other. One of them asked what had happened to the deputy and why there was no news from him. The second feared that the Chu family had discovered him and eliminated him. The group was sitting around a campfire. The scared man suggested that Lu Quan had betrayed them, to which the old man on the other side strongly disputed this, justifying that perhaps the deputy was waiting for an opportunity to release poisonous smoke into the heart of the Chu clan. The scared man was sure that the Chu family could easily have dealt with their leader in a bold manner and hysterically expressed it to everyone in the cave. The girl opposite with red eyes asked mockingly if it was worth bothering the family and if they would have any problems after that. The masked man in a gray kimono put his hands in his sleeves and said that the Chu family was really bullying them and demanded that the intermediaries move now instead of looking for the right moment. He argued that their generation was a threat to their cult, so old Chu Chai-ming wants to use the sect to train young masters, but he still doesn't know what will happen if Chu Qin dies. Putting his hand to his chest, he absently demanded to find the 13th brother so that he could personally kill him. The 3 cultists bowed to him as a sign of obedience. They rushed to find Lu Quan. The old man pulled out a blue petal that would help him find out if the second-in-command was still alive. He clenched it in his fist, and it shattered into small pieces. Chu, meanwhile, was eating a fresh lunch and laughing with the servant, amiably saying that the meal was getting better and better every day. The servant happily said that the young master led the clan to fight the villains, and it was a success, so the master has a big feast to celebrate. Chu choked. He couldn't believe that they had won so soon. The cultists returned to the cave. The old man said grimly that Lu Qin was dead. The scared man breathed out that at least the second-in-command hadn't betrayed them. The girl said in a puzzled voice that she hadn't heard a single word about the battles in the Chu lands. The masked leader said irritably that the joint purge of the clans had already inflicted a huge wound on them, so there was no need to worry about the second-in-command. Slamming into the stone wall, he yelled that they had already lost 1 stronghold and 4 void realm elders. He blamed the Chu clan for these deaths and said that it was not worth attacking them yet, as he had previously underestimated their power. He then demanded to report the actions of this clan to the king so that the demonic court would take care of them. He was plotting a plan to attack the other clans. Chu Luo choked. Were there any other cultists in the house? The servant nodded convulsively, saying that the Huo ancestral land was torn apart by the poisonous fire and smoke, and 1/3 of the land was damaged. Hundreds of people were injured and killed. He regretted that no one would have thought that they would take revenge so quickly. Meanwhile, the old master head of the Chu family was informed that their masters had already returned from the surrounding area and the rest were on their way. The old man nodded and added Don't forget to strengthen the troops and guards to prevent the Hugh family from making mistakes." The servant bowed respectfully, assuring that there were already 15 new posts in the ancestral territory and the ranks were reinforced. The master noted the good work and asked where Chu King was now. The servant replied that the youngest of them had led the cleanup operation and was now returning to Bowie County, which was far away from the ancestral home. The old man thought as he rubbed his beard. Their family started a campaign against the cultists, so why did they start a war against the Ho family in turn? He was afraid that they were already close. Meanwhile, Chu Luo was thinking about the same impending attack. The servant reassured the young master, assuring him that most of them had already retreated and they had increased their security and no one would be able to just fly over. He continued that they had already destroyed more than half of the cultists, and it was only a matter of time before they found the rest. Chu Luo looked up at the sky and listened to the soft song of a bird, exhaling that he was now safe as well. It's been 6 months. The cat jumped up in an attempt to catch the bird, but it abruptly flew away, and now the pet hung on the branch, mewing plaintively. Chu laughed at the failure of the cat named Blackie. The animal looked reproachfully at its owner. Without turning around, the youth was telling Blackie that he had already reached the Void Realm, but the inner eye still hadn't fully opened. Moreover, he learned to perceive auras from a distance of more than 100 kilometers. There was a commotion on the other side of the gate. The young man looked around suspiciously. The young girl's lips were stretched out for a kiss with a dark-haired guy. The two of them were cooing passionately in the shade of the trees, and Chu watched them with a dumbfounded expression. Chu Luo was going crazy. He couldn't allow such passions around him, and even strangers. With a swipe, he slapped the guy across the face with his aura. The girl laughed, and the guy looked around in shock, not understanding who was watching him. He looked around and shouted, demanding the offender to show himself. Then he reached out to kiss her again, chirping that it was his love for her that hurt so much. They kissed. Chu felt dizzy from what was happening. The guy in front of her was about to pull his sleeve down from her shoulder, but then Chu got angry and abruptly directed all his energy at a powerful blow. The love-struck stranger ran away, shouting that he had been overtaken by ghosts and that the House of the Black Moon had betrayed him. Chu cursed and gave a final middle finger. He fell back on the sunbed in the yard, panting and glad that he had been able to prevent their love frenzy. The kitten meowed reproachfully. Chu waved his hands, not knowing which side Blackie was on. He made excuses that he would not be able to find a girl for a long time, which is why it is so hard for him. Then he thought about it, remembering what he had said about the Black Moon House. He was puzzled. Why on earth would this guy remember that? The Ding system has declared Chu to be a true Hicker who hasn't left the house for 6 months, which means a new reward, the Heavenly Sword Sutra. The new book immediately flew into his hand. The next morning, a servant reported to the young master that Elder Chu Yuexin, the master of the Void Realm, had fallen, and the Black Moon House had leaked the information. Chu perked up. He was thinking again of that fleeing lover. He asked the servant if it was true that the House of Black Moon was a cult. A squat fat man said condescendingly that they were their informants. The servant stood by the set table and continued the story. The House of Black Moon was a supporter of evil, but because it is mysterious and powerful, no one knows where its headquarters are. No power has yet managed to destroy their tower. The young man excitedly asked what the Chu family had done to them in response. He replied that the family had recalled all of their direct descendants to the ancestral home to prevent them from being killed by the sect. In the end, the Qin royal family and the Chu family made a deal with the Black Moon House, paying a certain amount to ensure that their house would not accept orders from the cult in the near future, and the Chu house would be the first to receive all the information if there was an attack. Chu Luo pondered. If Qin already has a plan, then there's no need to worry about the cult. Ding Chu was now in his 7th month at home. System reward, small 5-element formation and formation plate. Another book flew into Chu's hand. He read, anyone who can create a formation in the southern region has great power. It turns out that the lower the cultivation, the weaker the formation and disc. The young man grinned and held out his palm to test the technique. A pink halo spread out around them and shot towards the distant mountains on the horizon. Chu noted that this formation was strong enough to trap or even kill those belonging to the realm below. If the visitor is no higher than the 4th level of his realm, then Chu has nothing to fear. He was relieved to think that it would soon be a year since he had lived in this house, and the reward for a year would definitely be above the level of the Emperor's scripture, or at worst, at the level of the heavenly scripture. Chu lay down on the couch and continued to read the scriptures dreamily. There were loud conversations outside the fence, one of them complaining that Chu King had been attacked by 3 sect elders and the deputy master was now seriously injured. The second person replied that it must have been someone close to Chu King who harmed him, perhaps a spy from the Black Moon Tower. The first one barked that he wanted to kick the ass of the person who had hurt them personally. Shu Luo listened to their conversation without looking up from his book. Finally, he sat down with his cheek resting on his palm and pondered. Some enemy is forcing Chu Qianming into action. Was this a ploy to get the tiger off the mountain? He grimly noted that someone from the cult might attack him again. He was quite tired of this and intended to use the halo formation again so that he wouldn't be disturbed. Ding Chulo has been home for 8 months now. System reward: spiritual silk bindings. The young man looked at the shiny blue threads in fascination, turning them over in his hands. He wondered if they were the same threads that bound and sealed imperial weapons. He imagined a certain girl wearing these ropes and told himself with a grin that these weapons and formations would be enough even if he was attacked by a level 7 fighter. Meanwhile, the sect's minions, the boy and girl from the cave, were watching the Chu house from the hill. The girl asked the second person if Chu Kulo's son really lived there, to which the latter replied in the affirmative. The girl looked at him dreamily and said that she had an idea. The guy snapped at her to forget about his son and insisted that she think about business. But she didn't listen to him as she continued. What if she gave Chu Kulo a grandson, and that old bastard Chu Qianming a great-grandson? She thought it was funny. He bit his lip, finding her idea disgusting. The girl added with a smile, "Would the Chu family kill her if that happened? Or will Chu's son or grandson be killed? And what will be the expression of the face of the unfortunate grandfather?" The guy smiled sheepishly and said that if he were in his place, he would be angry. Then he hesitated and realized with apprehension that his refusal would not be accepted. The intermediary of the sect turned away from the accomplice and was annoyed that he did not understand her. In her opinion, this was the perfect plan to take the young man hostage. The guy looked at her askance and asked, "Will the Black Moon House sell their actions to the Chu family as information?" The girl looked around mischievously and playfully asked, "How can honest people do this? After all, if, as she continued, the Chu family suffered, then they could sell the information at a higher price." Shu Luo, meanwhile, continued to eavesdrop on the intruders outside the fence. A voice yelled that the Black Moon House was sowing discord for the sake of making maximum profit. Shu Luo finally got up from the sunbed. He wondered why the cultists were coming at him again. He sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the waxed-up pair of cultists. The girl called him handsome, and Chu just looked at her darkly from under his brows. He believed that her dark cultivation had also ruined her brain. The girl stuck out her big breasts and called Chu to her, expressing a desire to give birth to a sweet boy from him. She moved forward. Chu tensed as a sudden jet of energy from under his fingers hit her and knocked her back. The girl fell unconscious, and Chu just grumbled that he was tired of it. The cultist asked himself fearfully how old this young man was. Then, in a flash, he leaned forward and ran out of the gate. But he couldn't get far. He crashed into the invisible wall of the formation, bruising his face. The guy did not understand where this technique came from and asked himself with fright, did his father really come back? Then he remembered the poisonous smoke, but Chu caught him in his silken bonds. The cultist fell to his knees, trying to get out and understand what was happening. The flower monster, meanwhile, had eaten another of Chu's victims. The young man sarcastically apologized to the plant for the girl's terrible taste. Then he turned to the remaining cultist, cursed, and placed a soul seal on him. A red hieroglyph was imprinted on the guy's forehead. As if under hypnosis, he slowly began to say that he wanted to kill him, but now there is peace in his heart. Chu Luo noted with a grin that it was the seal that had changed his feelings, and now he could give away a piece of his soul. Closing his eyes, he wondered if it would be a violation if his spirit left the courtyard. He didn't want to risk remembering all his achievements. Then he turned to the recovered boy, asking why they had come. The guy resentfully replied that the sect had asked them to bring a trickle of magic smoke to deal damage to the Chu family. After all, it makes weak people go crazy. With a fist on his chest, he continued, lowering his gaze, that the Chu servants must have suffered. The youth noted with a sneer that the sect was really ruthless this time, since they had brought magic smoke that was difficult to make. He then pointed his finger at the gate and ordered him to return to the cult's lair, release smoke, attack the strongest members of the cult, and kill as many middlemen as possible without revealing anything about the Chu family. The man listened as if spellbound. The sect members were worried. They were once again collecting things from the cave. One of them, a man with gray hair, said disdainfully that he didn't become a cultist to be a shepherd's sheep. The other told him that if they were discovered, the Black Moon House would immediately report their location. The red-haired guy in the green suit was furious. He demanded to stop talking in front of him. He resented the topic of mentioning the Chu family. The arrival of the second patriarch of the Qin cult, the judge of the Purple Moon Kingdom, was announced. Everyone looked at each other. They asked each other, what could have brought their kingdom here through such a long journey? A swing kick followed all the whispers from the red-haired youth. Then the fighter smiled at the newfound master, sarcastically asking for forgiveness. The mentor agreed with his decision, reproaching the people for their talkativeness. They then discussed why the kingdom's judge had personally come to them. The mentor explained that it was because of the heavy losses on their side. The hooded youth viciously mentioned Chu Chaming, the head of the Chu family, because of whom they are being defeated. The head of the sect was his brother, who is now also killed like many others. The second mentor continued that Qin is ruled by 4 families, and Purple Moon's power is concentrated in the hands of a smaller group, so after the last incident, the families decided to unite to deal more damage. The hooded youth asked softly, how about they and their sects join forces and kill Chu Chiming? To this, Brother Wang Tu replied that it was impossible since they had such a strong person in the team. The red-haired youth pointed out sarcastically that there was a young master from the Qin family who was working with them and no one knew about him. He opened a dark ball of mist in his palm. It was magic smoke. Everyone gasped in surprise. The guy said quite happily that even in death, he would be the winner. Then he said wearily that he needed to wait for Elder Zhu Quan to respond. Zhu Quan, the intermediary who had been hypnotized by Chu Luo, appeared in the doorway. The cultists anxiously asked where his accomplice was. The guy slowly reported without blinking that Zhu Yan's accomplice was still hiding in Chu territory. At the same time, he was thrilled to know that what he was saying was not true. The red-haired boy, the master, sighed, daydreaming about her beautiful face. Zhu Quan was afraid that they would believe him and prayed that they would understand that he was trapped in his own mind. Wang Tu took him by the shoulder in a friendly manner and asked if he had anything else to say. The boy blushed. He was sick from his own lies and the loss of control over his physical body and words. My brother stepped back, reassuring everyone that they still needed to find information. Zhu Quan was terrified that what he was about to do was kill them all. At the same time, he hoped that they would have time to run away and realize that he was out of his mind. Finally, he opened the palm with the magic smoke. The red-haired master was shocked. He was hit by a blow from the cultist. The second one asked what kind of fly had bitten him. They sensed danger. The hooded guy called him a traitor. Zhu Quan leaned forward, shouting that he would die for master. His eyes glittered fiercely. He was laughing viciously that none of the cultists could fight back properly. In their eyes, he was only a traitor. The hooded man was writhing in pain, shouting that he had gone mad and the Chu family would be destroyed. Zhu Quan madly rolled his eyes. Then he twisted his face and blurted out that no one dared to defeat him. His mind was calling him crazy. The cultists conspired to kill him. At the same time, Wang Tu knew better than to panic. Then he reproached Quang, remembering how he had raised him and couldn't believe that his pupil was now paying for his kindness in such a way. The intermediary behind him grimly noted that his disciple was already dying. Shine, and the radiant ray from Zhu Quang's finger is stabbed into his mentor. Everyone started to run away. He managed to grab one of the cultists by the shoulder. The man begged him not to leave him, but he was already alone with him. Then the disciple turned around and grumbled at his strange persistence. He tried to talk to him, but Zhu Quan grabbed his shoulder, preparing to kill his former colleague. The hooded master called out to him. He hovered in the air in a lotus position and sarcastically asked why Zhu didn't get him out of here first. Zhu Quan was going crazy at the time. He hysterically took his brother's hands and, crying, remembered that they were born with him on the same day, therefore, they were also on the same day. Finally, he blurted out that the time had come. With these words, there was an explosion, the cave disappeared. The red-haired man, hearing the commotion behind him, only noted wearily that it was time to look for a new place to live. The Ding system praised Chu for destroying the cult and rewarded him with 10 years of training. Chu Luo yawned as he stretched and sarcastically remarked on Zhu Quang's good work. He then looked around with a frown, feeling that after breaking the limit, his strength growth seemed to have slowed down. He reasoned, what will his progress lead to if he stays in the house for a long time? It seemed to him that even his current strength wasn't enough to deal with all the villains and master villains. He was encouraged by the purchase that was always with him, the blue pills that gave him a boost. He was sure that with steroids he would become stronger. Then he looked around dumbfounded. Something in front of him had shocked him. He threw up. He complained, not understanding why he was being punished. Another way out, he clutched his head and realized that he'd had enough exercise for the day. The bird flew over him and Chu was able to suddenly catch it. Looking at the bird, he marveled at the power of the new kingdom. He was wondering, was old man Chu chiming on the same level? In a pleasant languor, he lay down on the bed with his arms crossed behind his head. He reflected on how lucky he was to have been born into a Chu family, to have free food, to have his own house, and even to have the servants clean up sometimes. Meanwhile, Master Wang Chu and Sister Yun came to see Wang Chang. The man bowed respectfully, and the old man slapped him, asking if he was aware that he was responsible for the attack on his family. He was ready to rip his head off. The guy held out his hands and tried to explain everything. The man chuckled and reminded him that he had important information to report about the Chu family. Wang Chang demanded 1 million spirit stones for the information. The master choked and barked if he wanted 1,000,000 shits. Wang Shu tried to calm him down by suggesting that he listen to half of it to see if it was worth the money. Then he asked the old man if he knew what magic smoke was. The old man shook and placed the bag of coins on the floor in front of the storyteller. He continued that a cult judge had arrived from the Purple Moon sect. They looked at each other questioningly. The old man asked irritably if he would tell him, and the young man held out his hand for a further sum. He dropped the bag of money and demanded to continue. According to his story, the protector brought magic smoke from the Purple Moon territory, and now they intend to use it to take revenge on Chu. The old man sternly asked if he had everything and doubted that it was worth 1,000,000. The young man, pulling the bag over, kindly noted that he wasn't finished yet. He added that the Chu family is well guarded, but at the same time, the cult received 2 pieces of underground void cloth. The old man's eyes bulged. When he came to his senses, he asked if the young man was sure of what he was saying. The young man condescendingly replied that he was a businessman, and therefore there was no point in selling unverified information. Holding out 3 fingers, he assured that in case of incorrect information, he is not only ready to return the stones, but can also pay compensation in 3 times the amount. He also mentioned that he has a magic weapon against smoke. The old man bowed respectfully and grimly threatened to eliminate him if he found out that Wang Chu had sold this cloth for the treasures of the void and he would not be able to pay the 3. Then he abruptly turned around and waved his hand, asking to take care of himself. When he went outside, he cursed, not understanding how he could fool him for 3 bags of such information, but it was too late to return. He promised to deal with the House of the Black Moon and destroy it. Yun ran to Chu Luo in the morning to tell the news. A certain powerful cultist had arrived on their lands to start a war. The brother hesitated, scratching the back of his head, and jokingly noted that he now understood why he has been seeing cultivators of the Kingdom of Emptiness around his house so often lately. The sister scratched the cat behind the ear. then quietly replied that, according to rumors, the sect had acquired a magical weapon that could hide their movements. Chu thought about it. He should have been more careful with his aura now. He assumed that this weapon could be a sphere of emptiness and a disguise. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his sister, who begged him to return to his ancestral home. She enlisted to plead for him. Chu abruptly replied that he was fine here, crossing his arms in protest. He recalled old man Chu Chanming's face with disgust and was not ready to see him again. The girl was confused. The clan was in danger and the cult was already starting to act, while the 13th brother was so far from home. The young man did not understand anything. The headquarters of the cultists had been destroyed by a hypnotized intermediary. What else could they do? The sister continued with excitement that a certain great man from the sect came to Chu with magic smoke. Clenching her fist, she continued confusedly that the smoke is very poisonous, even if you just touch it. Chu Luo spat and angrily asked when it happened. It turned out he arrived today. My brother thought intensely that if not for the destruction of the cave, everything would have been burning with hellfire long ago. His sister urged him to come back and leave his grudges against his grandfather. He asked rhetorically, what can a cult do with so much reinforcement? The sister, having calmed down, sat down on the couch and smiled. The young man did not understand why such a change. She cheerfully replied that then she would stay here with her brother and would not return home. He was taken aback and immediately asked her to be smarter, assuring her that he would be fine. Yan was sure that the cultists would come soon, and he alone would not be enough. The brother instructed on his own. After a moment, she stood up, surprised at his optimism. He exhaled and assured that he would find a safe place and would not fight them. But the girl lay back down, noting that she was better here. Chu Luo covered his face with his hand. He was already getting angry because of her stubbornness. The girl chirped something about the cat, not listening to his arguments. Meanwhile, Master Chu Chanming was holding a meeting at his place. He said that now was the right time to prepare for the clan's attack. Despite the active reinforcement and protection, they should have been more vigilant now. Raising his index finger, the old man continued that they would kill the entire clan as soon as the sect joined them. One of the fighters present hesitated. He recalled that the 13th, younger brother still lives on the outskirts. The master interrupted him, saying that Chu Yun was already with him and should talk to him. In case he doesn't come back, he will be looked after. However, his death would tarnish the entire reputation of the Chu Luo family. Yun wished her brother a good morning. He was surprised that she was up so early. The girl boasted that she had already managed to train, even though she had not yet seen anyone from the sect, another reward of the system. The girl backed away, not understanding what had happened, then cautiously asked why he needed it if he was not practicing. Chu Luo only asked her to remember that his father lived here, and he decided to look at his practices. Master Chu Chanming walked back and forth in his courtyard. The servants whispered that the master had not eaten anything for the 3rd day. The old man looked at them reproachfully, asking them to be quiet. He was annoyed that the cult was so cowardly for a one-on-one battle with him. Next, the action is transferred to the hall of Wang Chang, the same one who previously sold the information to Chu Chanming. A certain young man reported to him that there had been internal unrest in the sect, and now their gathering place had been destroyed, and half of the Purple Moon clan remained. According to him, Zhu Kuang exploded like fireworks, and the cult judge went crazy from all this bloody spectacle. The servant ended the story by saying that Wang Chu now owes the Chu family. He maliciously asked if he wanted more money. The young man was taken aback and finally asked what to do. The owner only said that the decision was his and the new information could only play into their hands, then nothing would threaten the reputation of their house. With his hands on the guy's shoulders, Wang Chu demanded that he go to the cult as soon as possible. Chu Luo watched the sunset and thought that Grandpa would find out about the cult sooner or later, and then the Black Moon would begin to act. He felt the power of the aura in his hand and already foresaw a fierce battle at his level. Chu Lu understood that if he could take over the Black Moon House, then everything would be under control, but alas, he did not have such an opportunity now. There was a knock on the door. A servant entered and brought food. Chu gloomily asked him if anyone else could be plotting evil against Chu besides the sect. A servant ran into the hall to see Master Chu Chanming. He quickly called out to him, and the old man asked him not to torment him. The servant had some good news. The sect branch in Chu County had been destroyed. He described how the walls were covered in blood, windows were smashed, and the courtyard was full of corpses. The old man put his hands on his hips and looked at him questioningly. The servant continued that they had found traces of the power of the judge and the sect elders, as well as traces of releasing magic smoke. She believed that the sect might have encountered a strong enemy and retreated. The master wondered who could have done such a thing. The guy exhaled, saying that they wouldn't have to worry about black smoke anymore. The old man grinned, then laughed, imagining Wang Chu's face when he heard the news. He called for a servant to come with him to the Black Moon House to receive triple compensation. Chu Luo greeted his sister early in the morning. Yun felt happy as she boasted about her training progress. Her brother asked her to go to the ancestral home to make a breakthrough. My sister was surprised. How could he know that she was about to commit it? He reassured her by saying that he simply couldn't protect her at the crucial moment, and then seriously added that old man Chu shouldn't see the technique he gave her. The girl promised not to turn him in. Chu sensed someone approaching the courtyard. Grandpa himself was walking towards him with a servant. He was terrified, not understanding why he was coming to him right now. Chu Changming looked at his grandson intently, asking why he was still here. The young man recalled his exile and the shame of his family. The old man demanded not to be a fool and immediately returned to the ancestral home. He didn't answer. The sister cheerfully broke the silence, saying that she would soon make a breakthrough and therefore wanted to stay here as well. Chu listened tiredly to their conversation. After praising his granddaughter, he once again put on a serious expression and spoke to Chu Luo, saying that if his father knew what his son was like, he would regret it. The youth was discouraged and a dark aura formed around him, ready to break through the limits to strike. The old man frowned, asking what kind of power it was. The sister didn't understand anything, and the old man let out a sigh, saying that it seemed to him that the grandson was actually very weak. The sister cheerfully added that there was no one stronger than Grandpa. As the old man walked away, he tried to tell himself that he was imagining it, but it was difficult. He had not seen the aura of the sphere of harmony for many years, and it could not be confused with anything else. As they parted, he told Yun that he had to go to Black Moon House for business. Then he frowned at Chu and added that he would be punished with 50 strokes of the cane and then return to the ancestral home. The young man rolled his eyes and wearily replied that he was happy here. Grandpa snorted and hurried out. Chu Chenming stood in front of Wang Chu and firmly said that this was the first time that the information from Black Moon was false. The man claimed that this was not the case, it was just that the Path cult had an accident. At the same time, he couldn't understand what the cultists were up to and why events had changed so dramatically. The old man was trying to pull himself together to convince Vaughn to repay the debt. He was wondering how Wang Chu would get out of this situation. The man was regretfully aware that this situation would ruin the reputation of the House of Black Moon. Emboldened, he offered the old man new information for 1,000,000 stones. Chu Tianming enterprisingly asked if it was worth the money. Wang Chu was confused, thinking that the old man was blackmailing him. Then he slowly said that if the Court of Mortar wanted to enter the Chu or Qin lands, he would be the first to know. The old man looked at him from under his brows and menacingly demanded to tell him everything at once and not to try his patience. Wang Chu helpfully reminded him of the Black Moon House's authority. They looked at each other in silence. The leader said with a sneer that the first vice patriarch and the 2 guardians of the sect had already arrived in Chu County. Then he reminded me of the $1 million price tag. The old man continued that the chief is already at the peak of the 8th Void Realm, and the guardians are at the 7th Void Realm. He asked if Wang Chu knew about their location, to which Wang Chu ingratiatingly warned that this was the next piece of information. The old man sighed and said that the fact that he was in Chu territory wasn't worth $1 million. We can assure you that their family would have already received a report that violators came during this day. Wang Chu handed over a piece of paper and reported that it contained information about their next hideout. Chu Tianming rolled up the paper and waved it in front of his face as he said goodbye. He was already planning an attack plan. Vice Patriarch Zhang Kui stood in the backyard with his hands crossed behind his back. Master Dongquan from Chu County was reporting to the teacher how Zhu Kuang had suddenly gone mad for an unknown reason. He believed that Kuani had something to do with Purple Moon and might have gone over to their side. Zhang Kui asked about his accomplice Zhu Yan, but the disciple didn't know. All he said was that the Chu family was responsible for the loss of a fifth of the entire Qin cult's power. The man asked how they knew their location. Dongquan guessed what the Black Moon House might have told them. But the teacher didn't want to believe it, because they never sold information for the common good. His expression changed, and he ordered his disciple to prepare for a night ambush. The young man hurried to reassure him, mentioning the strong masters in the Chu clan, to which Zhang Kui growled that they should find out who was so strong that they rebelled against them so quickly. Then he added that he had already broken through to the 9th level of the Void Realm.